And now we're starting Tezayin Amud Aleph. When a Jew has dominion over a guy, he's in the shlita of the Israel. And even though the pasuk is going to teach us that if he wasn't poda the Eved B'Kesev Mole, meaning the amount of years that still haven't been serviced, then he remains in his rishus till the Yovel. O eno ela bi'ovei kochom she'eno tachas yod chabrit v'chima efshal lasos lo eno kos medabel bi'ovei kochom she'eshno tachas yodo. What can he do for this nochri if he doesn't have a shlita of Yisrael, if he's not under the shlita of Yisrael, the dominion of Yisrael? In any event, there's no way of getting him free. Okay, now we start the sugya for today, and again, I hope you don't mind that we did some chazara. Ubishtar, and Eved Ivri could be nikne bishtar minolan. How do we know this? Amar Ulam Akra, the pasuk says that if someone is married to an Amavriya, and then he was Makadish's second wife, Imacheres Ikachlo, and in this pasuk there's a hekesh between Amavriya and Acheres, meaning an Eshes, a full-fledged Ishus. Ikisha Kosev Lacheres, Ma'acheres B'Kanya B'Shtar, Af Amavriya Mekayim B'Shtar. Now, why do we choose Shtar? There are different methods of being Kona and Amavriya. Who says that the Torah's equation between Amavriya and Isha Cheres is Dafka B'Shtar? So the Gemara says, Hanichol Amanti Omar, Shtar Amavriya Adon Kosvo. We have a full-fledged comparison between Shtar Kiddushin and Shtar Kinyan. If I assume that the Adon, he's called the Kona, and in the case of the Makadesh and in the Isha, the Makadesh is the Kona. And when he's Makadesh, the daughter of a father, he's going to say, Bitcha Knuya Li, so he's writing the Shtar. And just like in Shtar Kiddushin, the Kona writes the Shtar, and this we derive from the Pasuk. So too, in the case of Amavriya, the Kona writes the Shtar. And that's how he's Kona the Eved Ivri. Elamandiyom, but according to the other Mandiyom who says that Av Kosvo, the Shtar is not written by the Kona, but rather by the Makna, meaning the Av. How can you compare it to Shtar Kiddushin? In Shtar Kiddushin, it's not the Makna, meaning the Isha, who writes the Shtar, but rather it's the Kona. The Itmar Shtar Amavriya Mikosvo. And here we have two days, as we said before, whether it's the Kona or it's the Makna. The Makna in this case is the father. Rav Huna Amar Hadon Koso, meaning the Kona writes the Shtar. Rav Chizna Amar Ha'av Koso, the Makne or the Mocher writes the Shtar. Hanichel Rav Huna, everything is good according to Rav Huna, who holds that Ha'adon Koso El Rav Chizna Ma'ikal Meimar. Right, we can't derive Shtar Amavriya from Shtar Kiddushin because according to Rav Huna, according to Rav Chizda, the halacha is that the Makna, meaning the father, is going to write the Shtar. Omer Rav Achbar Yaakov Omer Kra Lo Teitze Kitzeis Havadim. In the parsha of Amavriya in Mishpatim, we have the parsha of Shein Yitzia B'Shein V'Ayin. So we're talking about Roshei Eivarim of an Eved Kanani. And if the Adon knocked off one of these Eivarim, then the Eved goes free. Avol Niknes he Kekiyan Avodim. Although in the case of Eved Kanani, there's no din of Yitzia B'Rosh Eivarim, but there is a din in which we compare an Eved Kanani to an Amavriya, and that is that there's a kinyan of Avodim. And Ma'ininu, what is that kinyan of Avodim? Shtar. So it means that just like Eved Kanani is niknev Shtar, and let's say, for example, I own an Eved Ivri and I want to sell it to someone, so I could sell it to him with a Shtar, and that we'll see in the Mishnah later on. And now we have a hekesh to karka. And just like karka is nikneis b'shtar, so too Eved Kanani is nikne b'shtar. fact, the Gemara, I don't understand. You're equating Evet Knani to kinyonim of karka. Ema avol niknesi bekinyan avodim aynenu chazaka. You could be kone an Evet Knani through chazaka. You tell him to do a certain activity on your behalf, and let's derive the conclusion that, in general, we would say that there's a kinyan of chazaka in Evet Knani. Just 1 second. No, I'm sorry. Again, there's a kinyan chazaka in Evet Knani. I made a mistake. I mean, that's a given. I don't know if I said it the wrong way, but we want to know whether the kinyan chazaka that operates in Evet Knani could also operate in Alma Vriya, which would mean that instead of being marbe shtar, we're going to be marbe chazaka. And the Gemara answers Alma Kro with regard to the parsha of Evet Knani. It says v'snachaltem osam livnechem acharechem, which means that your avodim knanim will now pass on through inheritance, through the Yerusha laws, to their children afterwards. But the pasuk is equating Evet Knani with stei achuza, where it says v'snachaltem osam lo reshes achuza. And we're going to derive from this that just like a stei achuza, which is karka, is niknes b'chazaka, so to Evet Knani is nikne b'chazaka. And the pasuk emphasizes nachaltem osam. And what's the emphasis of the word osam? Only in Evet Knani there's a kinyan chazaka, but not in Om Ivriya, not in Evet Ivri, only in Evet Knani, the chazaka. So the Gemara asks me, Ema, maybe osam b'shtar v'lo acher b'shtar. Maybe when the Torah used the word osam, it's excluding the kinyan shtar. The kinyan shtar would not be operative with regard to Evet Ivri or Om Ivriya. How do you know to be marbe shtar and to exclude chazaka? Maybe the Torah is excluding shtar. And the answer is haksiv. Pasuk says lo teitze kitzeis avodim. And this teaches us that the kniya is like a kinyan avodim, meaning the shtar. Now I think the Gemara is going to ask my chazis. Let's see if I remember this correctly. Ouch. Umayra Isa, same as my chazis. How do you know the ribi is on shtar, the miyad on chazaka, not the other way around? Mistaber shtar, havila the ribuya shekem otzia b'vas Yisrael. The power of shtar is such that it can undermine ishus in the case of gerish, whereas chazaka is not a substitute for gerish. Effective Gemara Adarab, I'll show you that chazaka is a better and more far-reaching kinyan than shtar. Havila kishikein kona v'nitzay ager. If there's hefker, you could be kona with chazaka. You can't be kona with the shtar. Who's going to write the shtar? Gemara answers b'ishus mia aslo ashkan. We don't find a kinyan in chazaka that goes beyond the kinyan shtar. And we want to focus on ishus. And this is a fascinating piece of Gemara because the Gemara is assuming that Om Ivriya and the kinyan of Ivriya should be classified as ishus. So in the case of shtar, that's kona ishus. And that is the case of a get where she's konas atzma beget. So therefore it's more logical to be marbe shtar that it's kona b'om ivriya, because then in an ishus, shtar is operative and chazak is not. Iboy Sema says, I can give you another answer. Lahachi ahani imacheres. And now the imacheres is going to set up a hekesh between Om Ivriya and an Isha Miskadeshes to teach us lo teitze keteis avodim, and that's going to teach us the kinyan of shtar. Okay, we're going to fast forward now to where we left off yesterday. I finally found v'kones atzmo b'shonim, which means that after 6 years of servitude, he goes free. Dichsiv, and that's explicit in the pasuk in Shmos Perikov Aleph and Parshas Mishpat says Sheishanim Yavod Bashvius Yetzi Lechav Shichinam. Ubi Yovel. How do we know that Evet Ivri goes out? Be Yovel. Dichsiv Ad Shnasa Yovel Yavod Imam, and that's in Vayikra Chav Hey. So that's both Sheishanim and Yovel are explicit in the Torah. But now we have Giron Kesef. How do we know that an Eved Ivri can free himself through Giron Kesef, meaning by paying up the balance of the years of Avdus? And what that means is that even the Adon has to be Messiah, he has to take part in the pidyon. So in other words, all the years that she served are going to be subtracted from the sum of money that she needs to be poda herself. And on the other hand, the years in which she hasn't served, they will be subject to pidyon. So in a sense, it's a kind of shituf pula, a partnership agreement between her and the Adon. Tana, we learned in a brayso of a kona, and Eved Ivri is konas atzmo b'kesef, u'b'shava kesef, u'b'shtar b'shlem kesef. That's mefurish in the pasuk. It says in od rabos hashanim ada yovel lefiyam yashiv guloso b'kesef miknoso. So we're talking about kesef miknoso. It means that kesef is a kinyan for Eved Ivri. Shava b'kesef nami. We also have a ribui for shava kesef yashiv guloso rachmon ol rabo shava kesef kesef. El high star hechi domin. What is the case of a star which frees an omevria? Ilema the cause of lay that he, the Adon, wrote the shtara. That doesn't make any sense. Or Adomeha. What does it mean Adomeha? He got a star indicating how much money the Av would have to pay him off to be poded. In fact, the Gemara Hainu Kesef. Then star is not a new category; it's basically Kesef. Ella Shichrur. We're talking about a star Shichrur. This is a Pella. The next few lines of the Gemara is mamish mind-boggling. The Gemara is saying that just like in the case of an Eved Knani, you give a shtar shikhr, so too in the case of an Eved Ivri, you give a shtar shikhr. First, the Gemara questions why you need the shtar. Shtar lomali, the shtar is completely superfluous. Lema lebi apitrei zeal. Why does he just say zeal? Go free in front of two Eidim. Inami be'api be'idina zeal. So this is what we call mechila. And the owner of the Eved could be mochel on the balance of whatever years there are that he hasn't done his servitude. So there's no need for shtar. Omar Rava, get this. I mean, hold on to your chair. So Somers Eved Ivri Gufo Kanu. Pile Plun. Gufo Kanu. We know Gufo Kanu by an Eved Knani, but not by an Eved Ivri. Not only that, he goes free after 6 years, but it's not like a Kinyan Peiros, it's a Kinyan Aguf for those 6 years. And I would introduce here, I didn't find it in any of the Mefarshim so far, that he could give him Yud, he can give him a Shivcha Knanis. So that means there's a change in the status of the Guf of the Eved Ivri. And in such a case where the Adon, until the end of the 6th year, owns the Guf of Shalevet, there's no Pasui Mechila. Harav shemoch al girono, that's the amount of money that's left, right, corresponding to the amount of avdus. Ein girono mochel, there's no mechila on giron kesef. The money has to be forthcoming to the Adon, otherwise she doesn't go free. And why is that? Because Eved Ivri gufo konu, and she needs a shtar, and that shtar is a shtar shichrus that's mafkia all the kinyonim. Now the Mishnah says, Yisera Olav Amevriya. Amevriya has something that Eved Ivri doesn't have. And that's going to be Simonim. She goes out with Simoni Naros. Amrei Shlokish. Amevriya Kones Atzmo B'misa Sa'av Mershus Odom. Imagine, the father sold his daughter as an Amevriya. He died, never. And now, according to Reish Lakish, she goes L'cheres. And it's a pella because the owner or the buyer of the Amivriya paid good money. So okay, just because the father of this Amivriya is gestorben, therefore he loses money. And the Gemara says, according to Reish Lakish, this is derived with the Kal Vachomer. It means that even after what? After she reaches the age of 12 of Narus, she remains in the Rishus of the Av, and any wages that are forthcoming will now accrue to the father. And Motziyim Rishus Adon. When she has Simoni Narus, then she's no longer in the Rishus of the Adon. So in other words, Binureh Beis Havia teaches me that during her Narus, she's in the Rishus of her father, and any money that she accrues go to her father. And yet, we learned in our Mishnah that she goes free with Simoni Narus. So the Simoni Narus that cannot undermine the Rishus of the Av will undermine the Rishus of the Adon. Is Misa Shemotzia Rishus Av. When the father dies, she now collects her Maisi Yadayim and puts it in her own bank account. The Arshim have no schus, even though they inherit their father. Is Eino Din, it's a Kal Vachomer Shemotzia Rishus Adon. Just 1 second. No, this is an important point because otherwise we won't get the next Gemara. Going to Reish Lakish is when the father dies, she goes free. Again, Simonim don't remove the father's rishus, and yet they take rather rishus Adon. Misa removes the father's rishus. It's very interesting. You see the language here, Motzia Rishus Ha'av. I just want to make a lumdisha point over here on the side. It's not really for Daf Yomi, but the language of the Gemara, Motzia Rishus Ha'av, is very strange. I mean, the reason why she is no longer an Amivriya is because the father is dead. Not because the Misa itself is Afkas, Kinyan, Amivriya. That's true for Simonin. So this Kal Vachomer goes to follow that even if she goes free with the Rishus Hav, not because Rishus Hav is motzi her, as is implied by the Gemara in its language, but rather because there's no father. Who's going to collect her Maisi Daim? She collects it herself. Is Eino Din how much more so than Misa could be Motzia Rishus Ha'adam, because Misa cannot be Motzia Rishus Ha'av. Meisvei Rav Hoshaya Yisera Olav Amivriya Shekonis Atzma B'Simonim V'Misa Nisnei Nami Misas Ha'av. Why did the Mishnah omit Misas Ha'av as one of the various ways in which she gets Yitzia in the case of an Oma, Tad of Ashir? You're going to tell me that the Mishnah did not list all the cases, and Enochinami Misas Ha'av should be added, but Shir. Frekting Gemara, my Shir, the high Shir. Where else do we find the Shir? Because we never find one Shir. It's always one Shir proves that there's another Shir. And the answer is Shir b'Misas Ha'adam. Until now, we've been talking about Misas Ha'av. What about Misas Ha'adam? She was sold as an Amivriya to Ruvain, and Ruvain dies. Now, you might say that if the Eved has, if the Adon has Yarshim, he leaves a son behind, let the son step into the shoes of his father. And now she should be an Eved, or an Amivriya more precisely, to the Ben, to the Yorish. So again, the Gemara's logic and argument is the following. I already have a precedent for shiur because Misas Hadon is not mentioned at all in the Mishnah. And therefore, we would say that Misas Ha'av likewise was left out. Where it says, why? To Kevan de Ikanami Be'ish, Lo Ketane. And now we're referring to an Eved Ivri after he had a Ritzia. He goes free with the death of his Adon, and he doesn't have to serve the Yarshim who inherit their father. And that's what we had back in the Mishnah on Daf Yudalad Ovid Beis. Lo Ketane. The Tana didn't mention Misas Ha'adon, so we already have a precedent for Shir. But the Gemara raises the following kasha on Reish Lakish for Ela Nisne. The Tana should really mention Misas Ha'av, because according to Reish Lakish, as we saw before, the Amavri goes free with the Misas Ha'av, and he derived it from a Kal V'chomer from Simonim. So why did the Mishnah omit that? And the Gemara answers, Tana Dover Sheyesh Bo Kitzvah, Ktani Ve'ein V'Dover Shein Bo Kitzvah Lo Ktani. So if you're talking about Giron Kesef, if you're talking about Sheishonim, if you're talking about Yovel, they all have what's called a Kitzvah. In other words, we know up front what's going to happen. We know when Sheish is going to come around, when Yovel is going to come around. How much does he have to give back of the money of Miknaso? But in the case of Misas Ha'av, Ein Lo Kitzvah, nobody knows when the Av is going to die. And our Mishnah is only interested in Hotzah Lecherus, in those cases, which is a Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzvah, as opposed to Misas Ha'av. So Gemara says, I don't get it. Simonim also don't have a kitzvah. Can you tell me exactly when she's going to have shtei saras? We don't know. Ukitani, and yet it's listed by the Tana in the Mishnah. So you see, the Tana is listing even something that doesn't have a kitzvah, like Simonim. You don't know exactly when the Simonim are going to come about. Omer Rav Safra, ein lem kitzvah l'mala, v'yesh lem kitzvah l'mata. Even though we don't know when she's going to bring the Shtei Saros after the beginning of her 13th year, but what we do know is that Yeshlam Kitzvah Lamata. This is a halach of Shuma. You remember that halach of Shuma that sometimes hairs are, we used to call them when we were kids, I don't know, it's probably not in any dictionary, we should call it peach fuzz. Doesn't ring a bell, right? You're like when you're in high school, you're 14, 15. So everybody looks at their friend. One boy looks at another boy, and does he have the beginning of a beard? So we call it peach fuzz. That's not really a beard. And even in the pubic area, you could have peach fuzz. So that's called shuma. So therefore, yeshlem kitzvah lamata. And we're going to soon see that there's a three-way machlokas here, or three-way division of the years and the age of a person as far as Shuma is concerned. And that's going to be the sugya here, Daf Tezayin Amid Beis.